In the light of all things related to the degradation of the individual in 2019, depression, suicide, mass shootings, etc., it's about time that you do Lord Overlay puts any doubt to rest where these things come from and how we can solve mental health and social problems. First and foremost, I have to say this. If you doubt the things I say, let me respond in kind. Has a doctor figured this out? No. Their answer is to put these children on prescription meds and to schedule a series of appointments because that's how they make money. I mean, people just don't understand the things that I've said that has actually come into light. There's no money in the cure, which is why these doctors, psychiatrists, and mediators are not in the business of solving people's problems, which is why you're here. You have to understand that most things in American culture relies around a business model, how these entities can make money. But I digress. Let me get back on topic. Let's unpack the idea of mental illness, shall we? Where does this thing called mental illness come from? Well, first, how does one know if they're mentally ill? Answer. They're told that by their doctors, psychiatrists, mediators, family members, or friends. Every external source except the one source that matters the most, the self. Remember, the doing of drugs is a response to a diagnosis from somebody else. The doing of drugs is a response to a recommendation from somebody else. The doing of many things are responses to recommendations from somebody else, of which the person who thinks that these external sources have their best interest in mind takes that advice and leads them down a path of death and destruction. A big part of mental illness comes from relying on the insight of others that don't give a fuck about you, your life, or your future. Once again, I beg to ask the question, how do they know that you as an individual are mentally ill? They have to quote unquote observe you. Well, what if the person being observed feels like they're being ostracized by these people that are observing them, also by his social and lineal circles? The person's natural response is going to be to resist, to rebel, to rise against this form of social and lineal isolation. In other words, the person will most likely act in opposition to the norm, not because they're actually mentally ill, but because they've been rejected by everyone they know and everyone that they thought loved them. If you notice, these doctors, psychiatrists, mediators, family, friends, and even the government and police's solution to mental illness is to give these people drugs and to throw them in some sort of institution, specifically mental institutions or prisons. As you can see, these solutions, as I've said time and time again, don't solve problems. Their strategy for people they don't like is to label and lock up. So I've introduced two new terms in this video. One, lineal isolation, which is social isolation from your family. This is more pervasive than social isolation from your friends. Since blood is thicker than water, when your family rejects you, that will have a more lasting effect than when your friends reject and isolate you. Now, this happens in the black community so often. So often do black dads and mothers reject their children. This also happens in white communities too. Now, remember when I said above that the individual's natural response to entities that are ostracizing them will be to rebel. For black people resort to violence as a primary means to rebel against social and lineal isolation. For white people resort to drugs, violence, and suicide as a means to rebel against social and lineal isolation. As you can see, each culture of races handle lineal isolation differently. Now that I've developed this concept, where does lineal isolation come from? It comes from this idea. 1997 marked the end of the age of posterity as we know it. That was the year AOL Instant Messenger was released. Up until that point, most interactions were face-to-face. However, the release of that service put into motion a series of services that replaced direct communication with a non-equivalent substitute. Now, men use these services primarily, but men knew how to balance real communication or communication at jobs, events, and social settings with this social media alternative. In other words, there wasn't a spike in mental illness in the late 1990s or early 2000s. But if it wasn't the men, then who was it? Who was it that caused all of this lineal isolation and mental illness? If you want to know the answer to that, it's as simple as going to the most popular source. Facebook was created in 2004 with the expressed purpose of connecting women to the digital world. There were a number of social media services that existed prior to the existence of Facebook that didn't royally face fuck our society on a whole new level. But this one social media application called Facebook ended the age of posterity as we know it. How and why? Facebook puts images at the forefront of their service. All right? Woman's primary tool to manipulate men is through, you guessed it, visual stimulation, also known as images or pictures. Sex sells. Am I not right? Sex sells. And Facebook was the original medium that used visual stimulation as a business model to build their brand. All in the name of staying connected with your family and friends in the digital age. After Facebook came YouTube. After YouTube came Twitter. And the rest is history. These social media applications weren't built with the intention of strengthening relationships. These applications were built with the purpose of breaking the foundations of relationships down because they were built for women. That's why the mental illness and the lineal isolation is happening, because these companies are tapping into that marketplace for simps and thoughts. I told you in my posterity equals relevance video that women's spending makes up $18 trillion of the $22 trillion national debt that we have in 2019. These social media applications tapped into that woman's spending market through advertisements since 2004. How does this affect posterity? Posterity's real definition means the children. The children will suffer the most because children no longer have a need to have children. Women use the potential of children to get resources from men prior to the existence of Facebook. However, since these companies like Facebook and Google by way of YouTube and Twitter have built these services to advertise to simp men to spend money on these women. Women have all of the access to simp men's money that they need and no longer need to have children to get the money that they want. This is why you've seen a rise in divorces, a decrease in marriages, a decrease in birth rates, and the destruction of relationships as a whole. Digital advertising put feminism on super coke with a suit of armor like Iron Man, virtually unstoppable. This is also why the gig economy, i.e. content creation, is dominated by women. Now you may think, well, the biggest YouTube channels are PewDiePie, and PewDiePie is a man, so that can't be true. However, the outliers are not the majority. Men may be the outliers of performance in the gig economy, but the exception is not the rule. All a woman has to do is throw on some fake up and talk like a thought, and the simps will meritoriously throw that money like the big unit Randy Johnson. 2. Label and lock up. Women's solution to problems are to label and lock up. What do I mean by this? Whenever a woman doesn't like you for any reason, she will label you with some sort of label. Misogynist, racist, homophobe, etc. All with the expressed purpose to get you isolated from society, to lock you up. You see, prison doesn't have to be a facility away from civilization with limited access to resources. Digital prison can be rationing in the form of limited or no communication with your family and your friends. This is how women degrade men, through limiting your communication or affecting your communication adversely with your family and friends. I want to speak on a couple more points before I end this video. Why won't things get better? Why won't society change for the better to avoid extinction level events from occurring? Well, for one, you can't stop what you don't know exists. For example, people don't share my videos because they don't think what I'm saying is a thing. They just think that I'm just pulling shit out of my ass. That's an unfortunate thing, because when these things actually happen in your or their lives, then you'll get mad at me because I've said it all throughout 2019. Don't blame me for you not listening. I'm not the arbiter of free will, and nor do I want to be. Second, there's too many obstacles to get through for people to actually start listening. My channel has less than 100 subs. Let's just put it like that. That doesn't help others out. Moreover, because I'm not getting paid for this, I don't rely on people's patronage to get my message out. The choice is yours. And that's the way it always should be. Lastly, I'm not perfect, nor do I want to be. I made this channel to challenge you, my listeners, to think about things outside the normal convention. I don't shit sling on women because I like to. That's not why I do it. I shit sling on women because it's institutionalized. It's built into corporations, the government, mainstream media, and alternative media to smurf out the American people for a buck. That's why I shit sling women, because they're in bed with these entities, all working against hard-working men. Now, Chad and Tyrone don't have to worry about this because they're not the ones being targeted. Chad and Tyrone are just sperm donors. Nothing more, nothing less. But every other man has to be the target for these entities, and have to be, as I've said before, labeled and locked up. It's an unfortunate thing, but I'm only one man, and I can't save the world. I can only say I told you so. Lord, overlay.